folks. Welcome to the podcast today, episode number 22. I'm downtown Calgary near the Bow Tower, surrounded by people and food trucks at lunch hour. One of these food trucks is actually the Yummy Yogis, Calgary's only organic, healthy, and locally sourced food truck, also owned in part by my own fiance, my beautiful fiance. The reason I bring up food trucks today, in particular nutrition, because it's relatable to the topic of psychedelics. Ultimately, I believe that we all have our own free will and free choice to put whatever we choose into our bodies. When it comes to nutrition, we've seen so many different types of trends and fads and advice and controversial evidence supporting and negating different trends and such, especially when it comes to the Canada Food Guide, and also when we look at what is deemed as healthy by much of our government and our society. Ultimately, I believe that everyone has the right to know and trust where they get their food, and they can make their own choice of what they put in, but if you don't know what you're putting into your body, you can't be held accountable for what happens to you. Same with psychedelics. James W. Jesso has written 2 books on psychedelics, multiple articles, delivered many different talks, and continues to support his own website called Adventures Through the Mind. You can find him at jameswjesso.com. And while I walk into this beautiful structure here in front of me, I'll tell you a little more about how James and I are about to adventure through his own mind and talk a lot about his own personal experience with the psilocybin mushroom. James relates this to his own recovery from some psychological struggles he has had in his life. And in the book, Decomposing the Shadow, James writes a lot about the history of the psilocybin mushroom, different controversies and stigmas, and mostly James tries to offer a medium for people to understand how psilocybin works in the body and what ways are beneficial for you if you choose to integrate them into your lifestyle. James and I also talk about some of the current studies that are going on with different therapeutic uses of psychedelics, including MDMA and ayahuasca and LSD. And ultimately, I believe that the major lesson out of today is that psychedelics offer what many tribes and people across the world for thousands of years have been doing in using them as a form of plant medicine. And I believe that we all have the right to know and deserve to know what these substances actually do and how to properly use them. Yes, they are regulated. Yes, in most of the world they are illegal. That is changing in many ways. And soon I hope that we can live in a society where we no more are under the finger of the government in a war on drugs, or as Graham Hancock puts it, the war on consciousness, the war on preventing us from experimenting with ourselves, free from harming any other person. And ultimately, we have a right to know much, much more than what the government typically lets us know about when it comes to these substances. James also has written another book called Soundscapes and Psychedelics, where he explores the odd phenomena of music festivals and how psychedelics find their way into music so beautifully well in a lot of ways. And at the end of this all, I'd like to also mention that I have had the luxury and the privilege of sharing the stage with James. We've talked about nutrition, we've talked about health and being out indoors in nature, and how many of the healthy things that we can do integrate into our own consciousness. Not just psychedelics, but the way we relate with relationships, another main topic that James has been focusing on. I've also been an audience member when James has given talks on neuroplasticity and lucid dreaming. And at the end of this all, I want you all to sit tight, enjoy the ride as we go on this adventure through the mind. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today on the podcast, and a special thanks to Mr. James W. Jesso, who's joining us today. I gave a good intro just now, and I'll give you a little more. James has been a author now, successfully for the last 2 years. You started last year in 2013 by starting with an Indiegogo campaign with a book that you launched called Decomposing the Shadow. And it really explores a lot of studies and also personal insight into psychedelics, and mostly psilocybin, and what the effects on people are, and maybe some of the controversies and everything like that. And since then, you've done 19 events in 4 months. That was in 2013 for that book. And in April of 2014, this year, you came out with your second book, Soundscapes and Psychedelics. And I'd love to hear more on that front, because I haven't really dove deep into that book yet myself. And James is a very busy man, as many authors and dedicated authors are. As of recently, you've been touring the electronic music scene to really promote your book and do talks and more speaking engagements. And what else has been new for you these days? An audiobook as well, you said too, right?
Yeah, well, what's newest for me is touring the festival circuit and teaching workshops, and surprisingly, for the most part, not actually on psychedelics, but on relationship theory, something called conscious relationship as a spiritual practice. Now, anyone that may have already followed me and read some of my stuff on ayahuasca and my ayahuasca experience that I published through Cypress UK a couple months ago would probably be like spiritual, because I make it very clear exactly how I felt about spirituality in that essay. But yeah, that's what I've been doing, and it's been coming along well. I just released the audiobook, The 4 Archetypes of Psilocybin, on Bandcamp.
Yeah.
And I've also, I've just moved out of my house into a car to hit the festival circuit, and I mean, on a personal level, I've been training a lot in contact improvisation dance over the last year, and really found myself coming into a full embodiment of how much that means to me in the last few months also.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
wow.
A point on what you said about the 19 events, that was just in those 4 months.
Within 4 months.
Yeah, it was just in the 4 months after the launch, after I raised.
Decomposing the Shadow.
Yeah, Decomposing the Shadow, Lessons from the Psilocybin Mushroom.
Yeah, a notable event you said you attended, and did you speak at Spirit Plant Medicine Conference in Vancouver at UBC?
Yeah, I was blessed, actually. I believe it's organized by Conscious Living Radio out of Vancouver at UBC, like you said.
Yeah.
And I was blessed with the opportunity to be one of their keynote speakers last year, which was exciting. I had my face on a poster, like diagonal on one end, to like one of my like role models for psychedelic philosophy and writing and just general like self-published author entrepreneurship, which is Martin Ball, and then another one of my like role models for just being an extremely articulate speaker and intelligent person with a lot of gifts to offer the world of psychology, and that's Gabor Mate. There was a total like melt moment, like, ooh, that's my face next to those guys. Yeah,
cool.
So
good to see,
really
man.
Exciting, yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I've known you since before you launched your first book, and you had been doing a few different types of writings, like e-magazines, I guess you would call them, or zines, like just short, short
zines,
like 10, 20 page. Was that kind of the gist, like essay style?
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll get into the whole how do you take something that you like to do and turn it into the thing that pays for you to continue to do it. But several years ago, I guess it was actually in 2011, I realized I started a blog. I thought that'd be important.
Yeah.
The mentality of it being a website, not a blog. It's not just about me blogging about what I do, but this is a website that features my writings.
Yeah.
And it became very, very clear to me that people weren't really going to read it so much. Like, I didn't already have a following. And if I just asked somebody to be like, hey, when you're on the internet surrounded by copious amounts of other things that are streaming directly into your brain through social media, can you take the extra effort out of your way to look up my blog? Doesn't work. So I started creating zines, which are self-made magazines. The first ones I had were really small. They were like, this big. For people watching the video, it's, what would you call it? Like 3 by 5 inches or something. Maybe even smaller than that. 2 by 3 inches maybe.
Just small, digestible pieces.
Really small, like 30 seconds of reading. And I would go around and hand those out. I was just handing them out at Ask for Harvest last weekend too. Unfortunately, I had a whole handful of these, because the idea is that they're magic. you know, that they have in 30 seconds that you're reading it, in the short amount of pages that you have, they offer a very accessible and like integratable, if that's even a word, perspective on reality that really just switches you out.
Right.
And I kind of offer them up like they're magic, but the magic only it's only right if it's ripe, and it only ripens if it's in your pocket and read shortly after you forgot it was there. And I had pockets of these things to give out in like my magical little like elven, it's nighttime, last night of the festival, like let's have a little fun, you know, and be like a social creature. And I went back to where I had placed my things down, and somebody had taken my sweater.
Oh no!
Yeah, and I'm glad. I just spent like over $100 on a new vest because it was really nice.
Yeah.
And I wanted to support these people that like make their own clothes and stuff.
Sure.
So obviously, as an entrepreneur, if you want to be abundant, it's really important to remember that once you start to be recognized and some abundance comes in, that you like deliver that out to other people who are working on it as well, right? So, I mean, it wasn't. Yeah, anyways, it was, they had taken the vest out of the sweater, like, and then left the vest behind. So I was like, okay, that's cool, but because the sweater I found like hanging up on a street sign during a rainy day like 8 months ago.
They just wanted the sweater.
They just wanted the sweater. I hope it got them warm, and I really hope they gave out those little booklets.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if they liked what they read, they surely would say, hey, sweater I jacked had a bunch of cool shit in it.
Yeah. Or maybe they'll, I don't know, I kind of hope they're email. If you're watching or reading this, please email me. I really like that sweater.
Yeah. So Astro Harvest people, I think that's a good shout out, because that's where you just were.
Yeah.
Very recently. This was like last weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And so what else did you do to promote? I mean, you have these 2 books, which I would assume are kind of your 2 major book, like they're your books, right? Are they more important to you to have the word spread about than these small e-mags and stuff like that, or?
Well, they're different things. These small zines, right? They work as,
call them e-mags.
It's whatever you want to call them, man. It doesn't bother me. They're just words.
Yeah.
The term of description I use is zine, but for me they're gifts, right? I put in, sometimes I'd say I put more effort of my own physical effort into reproducing these zines than I do into the book. Mind you, there's months. Decomposing the Shadows, 3 years of work.
Yeah.
Right, and there's a lot of hours put into that. But then once that's done, you know, I just send the files to the printers.
Right.
But like these other ones, I have to go and I have to print them and cut them and fold them and staple them. I watch a lot of really great cartoon shows, intermittent, you know, filled with documentaries, folding all these zines because they're, you know, and like, yeah. So
that's your kind of day-to-day continuing to produce content just so you can get more of your concepts and ideas out there and so forth.
Well, the little ones are for gift. It's like, they work as promotion, but they're more or less like, I feel like they gift an experience. They gift something pretty, and it's nicer than giving out a business card anyways, you know? Yeah, so I like to give them out and make that happen. The books, obviously, that's my capital. Right? I invested a lot of my time, a lot of myself, you know, a lot of literally blood, sweat, and tears into producing those things, and they're the product, you know, that people can invest in to help invest in me, the thinker, the writer, the author, what have you. And so those are what I kind of primarily focus on selling when I'm out and about. I tend to like roam from camp to camp like I was a drug dealer or something, like, hey, do you guys like psychedelics? They're like, yeah, what you got? I'm like, books. They're like, oh, cool, you're not like a dirty hustler. All right, come into our camp and talk to us. So
nice.
So that's kind of where I go with it.
What a cool take on that. So with these small books, do they all relate to psychedelics, or is it still
no, almost none of them.
Just creative. What would I expect in any number of these small books if I were to receive one from you?
I'll give you one right now.
Sure.
Yeah, where's oh no, it's my backpack's out of frame.
That's
I'll
fine.
give you one later. But
so like an example,
Yeah, mostly they're about consciousness. So they're just short little word adventures into questioning the nature of one's experience or offering insight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so one of them I really like. I don't want to tell you what they are,
Right.
because then if somebody happens to get one, they already know the premise before they read it.
I see what you're saying.
But they're also all available on my website if you look back far
Yeah.
enough in the sections.
Nice, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, James, I've heard you speak many times. I've read a lot of your stuff, and I feel like you have absolutely much more than kind of what maybe a lot of people who follow you know you for is your thoughts on the human experience with psychedelics and everything like that. But I mean, just from knowing you as a friend and just seeing you speak about a number of different topics, I can definitely vouch that I would love to just have little gems of your insight hanging out, you know, and creative thoughts and philosophy, if that's kind of where it goes.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Yeah, I would love to offer you a couple.
Excellent.
I'll give you the instructions on how to cultivate the magic, and then give you a few to give out to your friends
Okay,
as well.
so there's definitely a playful nature to the aspect to that.
Oh yeah, especially once you get into my books, the new book, which isn't released yet, but we could talk about later. It's with an editor right now. Other than the new book, most of my writing tends to be kind of unrelenting, and it's just like, we're talking about stuff, like, let's get in there.
Right.
Even if that's, ranging from accessibility, Decomposing the Shadow is very accessible.
Yeah.
And sure that it could be given to, somebody's mom who's only dialed into the conventional big media culture and has never even read it, to somebody who's deep in the psychonaut world, and both parties be able to access it and get something from it. But my new one, Soundscapes and Psychedelics, is super heady, and I like that kind of like unrelenting.
It's a layer deeper for more of like a fanatic.
Yeah, it's just a different narrative exploring more far out topics.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And then in these little ones, I like to present it with this joking manner, because if you speak to me or if we hang out, I'll go into these like unrelenting like, and then it's intermittent, because I also like to laugh and be funny and whatever else. So I'd like to offer that to the experience as well, and much more than just like a set of words and set of ideas that I present. I like to offer myself as a person.
I think that must be imperative to just how people accept you. I think that anyone can agree that psychedelics and that being a topic of choice and of exploration is controversial at best, especially in the Western world. But can you share some more insight on your first book? Let's just say Decomposing the Shadow. You said from now it was about 3 years of work to get it published?
To bring it to publication. So I self-published it.
Yeah.
Essentially, the reason I self-published it is what I still think to be quite a valid reason to have chosen to self-publish it, which is that I felt I could distribute it well myself, and I could market it well myself, and which was true. I mean, I didn't hit the 10,000 copy range, but I wouldn't do that as an independent person, right? Or I would most likely not. Right? I felt like I could market it myself. I felt like I could outsource the things I didn't know how to do to the people directly in my community, friends of mine who have the skills to do it, and pay them to do that, right? And I could get it out there ASAP, rather than getting it out there 3 years from now when it finally comes through publication.
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to put it out there. That's why I self-published it, and that's why I ran the Indiegogo campaign, because it's very expensive to do that. So I raised $6,300 for the Indiegogo campain.
It's a great startup for a book.
Yeah,
That's
and
lots.
yeah,
is that enough for you? Is that you knew that going in, or
I actually calculated myself under, which I knew I could still pull it off, but it was like, that was like bare bones, $6,000 bare bones.
Yeah.
And that was because I was getting crazy deals from my friends that were helping me out. Like,
nice.
I got the, okay, I know you can't pay me very well, so we'll organize this like really minimal cost, right? And yeah, investing in payment for a lot of the I don't know if you'd call it post-production, like the stuff had been written, but a lot of the editing later, the designing, and the printing. After all that was said and done, I essentially only had like a couple $1,000s left, and that was supposed to tour me all across Canada for 3 to 4 months, hoping, all I know, I'm going to show up and every event's going to be like a flop, and I'm going to make no money. I'm going to have hundreds and hundreds of books unsold, right? So I was just like hoping, like, I could make it happen. But
and so for touring for that book, you took a big step compared to being, I guess, more local. You did a bunch of traveling. And give us a bit of a premise of Decomposing the Shadow, and then maybe talk about how it really was to get it going and to really get the word out there in those 4 months.
Yeah, so the premise of Decomposing the Shadow is taking what I learned from about 13 months of working with mushrooms to heal myself from self-diagnosed severe depression, borderline personality disorder, and psychosis.
Okay.
Self-diagnosed because I didn't trust doctors. Most people don't when they're in that state.
Yeah.
And moving from 13 months to being on the other end of that and being in an extremely healthy place in my life. And in that time, I realized that I wanted to become a writer. I wanted to embody writer as a career, not just as something that I thought was fun. It's something that I'd like to do. I'm going to take this into a career space. I had discovered my passion, essentially, and discovered a sense of like how to work with it. Mm-hmm. And people were like, oh, what you're telling me right now about what you learned in mushrooms as suggestions for when people would talk to me about it, or I'd have casual conversation. I got back over and over again, like, this is really valuable. It helped me a lot, And so I decided to write a book, and I invested a long time into writing it. I'm just recognizing that I'm trailing off from your initial question. The premise of the book is to offer a model, a conceptual model or framework or map for navigating what I would consider to be psychospiritual experiences with psilocybin mushrooms towards the benefit of personal healing or the advancement of psychospiritual maturity, which is a term offered by Neil Goldsmith, or coined by Neil Goldsmith and explained in more detail in the book. And in doing so, I cover several different parts. The first part is essentially, where am I? Who am I? How the hell did I get here? It's short. It's not about me. It's about the ideas. Yeah. Second part is, what are the mushrooms? History, science. What are the anecdotal evidence towards spirituality? What does that mean? Why am I using these words? What do these words mean? How are they going to be applied? And then the next part is the model itself, which has to do with the emotional processes that can activate and the potential benefits, like the results of each of those emotional processes and how to navigate them in certain ways. Yeah. And then the next part is tips and suggestions towards cultivating that type of experience. And then the latter part is just other ideas that didn't really fit in the book, but were fun to write as short little essays.
Wow.
Yep.
What a really cool journey, and a big topic to address. I mean, when you were saying that you were in a pretty rough state, that you felt like you were in a place of a bit of a depression and struggling with a bit of identity and stuff, what was the major contributing factor for you to decide that you're going to explore psilocybin mushrooms as a route to heal you, as opposed to any of the other conventional routes for people with those issues?
Well, I didn't trust the institutions.
Yeah,
essentially, and I'm over time, as I've gotten to know people, and surprisingly a lot of people that have explored with psychedelics that have found themselves into institutional places of mental health, I've seen that there are good sources out there of proper healing that don't have to do with psychedelics, but you can actually find it in the somewhat conventional paradigm towards psychiatry and psychology. But I didn't trust the institution, and part of the reason why I was kind of so... Wait, are you allowed to swear on your show?
Hell yeah.
Okay.
Fucking let it rip, buddy.
Okay, so part of the reason I was so fucked up in the head is because I was doing excessive amounts of drugs in Melbourne, where I was living for about a year, and that's kind of what broke my psyche, and I got home from Melbourne, not healed or anyway, after I'd spent some time in Thailand, which... trying to find yourself in Thailand doesn't necessarily work. It only just alienated me more so, to the point where I had, it's a story for another time maybe, but I had like a total psychotic breakdown in Thailand and went into like almost 24 hours of constantly like sleeping and like waking hallucinations and like passing out and feeling like I was dying and like all sorts of stuff in Bangkok.
Wow.
Of all places, in a crummy hotel room in Bangkok, like classic, right? So I get home and I'm living in my parents' basement, and in most of my life I've been pretty committed to like reading and being seemingly intellectual and like big conversations. I've really enjoyed this since my father was really into having strong discussions about God and studying Christianity, essentially. And then in my early adolescence, I had a buddy of mine who he was really super deep into like those really engaging questions about why religion is bullshit, quote unquote. So it was like good transitions. And so I was always committed to that. And when I was taking a bunch of substances, I had started to really go into all the psychedelic culture to justify why I was recreationally using so many drugs. Like, it was okay because see all these benefits. I had all this like knowledge to leak on, but it wasn't really being applied. I was still scrambling myself and just reaching for anything. But that information later became a foundation for making more intelligent choices, because as I'm living in my parents' basement, staying up till 5 a.m. every night, like bloodshot eyes, staring in front of a computer screen, looking up stuff about the Illuminati and like being really aggravated and upset and depressed and whatever else. Not to say that everyone in that space is there. That's where I was, however. So that's
right. And I would say that it is not as uncommon as you might think. I mean, I think, just to interject a little, that going into that kind of headspace, looking at, I mean, with the internet, with the amount of access that we do have to all of these kind of conspiracies and information and different ideologies that people have, I would say that from my experience also with looking where people slip into addiction, that's where a lot of people can end up. Not looking on the internet at these certain things, but something will come up in their lives that they just completely cling to and go down the rabbit hole, as it were.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes come out on the other end believing in certain things, and because of drugs and because of the kind of like rehabilitation that can occur there, I feel that some people get really ingrained into certain ways while their brain is very vulnerable from using a lot of drugs. And then come out of it and just completely not the same. Did you would you say that you still feel any ill effects from being essentially what it sounds like? I mean,
I wouldn't know. And yes, I was addicted, and not to anything specific, but to anything in general.
You just were
right?
there for the thrill.
Yeah. So I wouldn't be able to tell you if that's the case, because it's just my normal reality now.
Right.
And if there is still prevailing ideals, there is some, which is sometimes when I get kind of like I can't deal with what's happening. Like, yeah, I feel like I healed myself and I write this book and I have a healthy career, but I'm still human. I get myself all in like a funky headspace, and sometimes I'm just like, oh man, it'd be so much easier if I could still just go out and get fucking wasted.
Yeah. Go back
You
to
know?
those vices that once served.
Yeah, though at the same time, it's just like I see that I could do that, and occasionally I might, be like, okay, whatever, just a little bit. And it always tends to be with mushrooms, which is weird. I'm like, fine, I'll just eat some mushrooms at this party, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh god, I need to go lie down. I lie in the grass and be like, oh, that's why I took the mushrooms, because what I really needed to do was just think about what's going on inside of me and feel them, and not.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's another story. But I do feel like it's there, and I do cut into it a little bit. I'm only human.
Right.
But for the most part, I feel like whatever role my addictions at the time were playing in my life now is not expressing itself in drug use. However, I wouldn't doubt that it is in different ways expressing itself still when I'm in a place where I don't feel acknowledged, either socially or self-acknowledged. Right?
Well, I think that it was very well put, because more that I listen to you, I'm seeing a lot of similarities in simply being what being human is. So whether you've gone through addiction, or whether you've gone through grief or hard times in your life, whatever those mean to anybody who's listening, I think it is important to find something that you think will heal you, and something that you can be motivated in on your own, that you trust, that you're going to commit to. as long as you find positive benefit from it and that you aren't being blinded into belief about certain things, right? And then also continue to revisit exactly what it is that you developed as a bad habit or developed during a time of really kind of like negative times in your life, because sometimes even those, it's like a side effect of trauma, or a side effect of a hard time is you pick up other peripheral problems from the way you behave.
We mask the emotional accountability of essentially dealing with the emotions associated to trauma. We guard ourselves. I like to think of it as a hide, and like a double entendre. We hide the hide of our emotions, right, around our emotions, and then we create these compensation patterns where I'm just compensating for the hide, so it's not really my authentic, healthy behavioral self or expressed behavior. It's an expression of the compensation dealing with the hide around my trauma.
Cool.
Yeah.
No, it makes a lot of sense. It's like you've treated a symptom and the behavior that was causing the symptom is eradicated, but there still can be a lot of things happening in your own consciousness and your own personality that were so affected from those times. You know?
Yeah, and that's getting back on track with the book.
For sure.
That's what I found with the mushrooms. So I'm in this place, and then based on the philosophies of drug culture, you know, Timothy Leary, Terence McKenna, those guys specifically, mostly McKenna, because I was really into the concept around DMT, alien realms. It was a great escape from dealing with like the reality of my own life for me to think about how it doesn't really matter because there's these other sides of existence that is the true dimension, and it's far beyond my capacity to understand, and so I don't really need to be here now so much. I need to concern myself with these other things, and maybe for some people that's their area of investigation, and that's healthy for them, but for me it was escapism. So I eventually got to a point where I was like, okay, I need some help. Maybe the mushrooms can help, because maybe ayahuasca could help, but I don't know any shamans or whatever. That was my mentality at the time. Now I'd say like I didn't have access to a healthy social group utilizing ayahuasca under a skilled curandero, and I didn't see LSD seemed like way too much of an investment for the long term, and I didn't feel very capable of navigating it. I felt called to using mushrooms and gave it a try, and after the first couple months I realized like, oh, this is working. And I was doing it once a month, every month on the full moon, and I felt good. I felt good afterwards. I certainly didn't feel good during, because I was bringing up a lot of shit, and I was saying, you know, like, mushrooms, show me the pain, show me where it is, show me how to heal it, right?
So you wanted to go deep and dark and face yourself, face your ego.
I wanted to figure out what was going on.
Yeah.
And what was going on was a lot of shit I wasn't dealing with, so it had to come up for me to deal with it. And so in that time, in the 13 months, and I didn't plan the 13 months, it was just after the 13 months, I was like, oh, okay, here we go. I look back, and I'm like, where am I? And I was, you know, living in Calgary. I wasn't too far from that time to when we first met, you know, and I was in a healthy place. I started writing the book. And so the book was written. And another point, too, that I'd like to mention is that part of the intention of the book was to give a language to utilizing mushrooms in a healthy way. Because I don't know about you, but I feel like it would be safe for me to infer that you probably were brought up on a set of different ideas, potential ideas around mushrooms, and I'm leaning probably towards it was nothing more than a party drug, or it was as bad as heroin, which is probably like primary people get, but they're a medicine.
Definitely fed a lot of that in high school mostly,
Yeah, and so then, I mean, whatever, if you want to use something recreationally, that's your choice. In my opinion, freedom of consciousness, which a lot of us promote in the psychedelic spokespeople community, freedom of consciousness, you know. Freedom of consciousness means that if you want to use your mushrooms recreationally, if you want to go home by yourself and order ayahuasca off the internet and do it yourself and listen to techno beats in your room while smoking joints, and that's what works for you, go for it, man. That's you. That's your choice. Like, I support you in your own freedom of consciousness.
It's not harming includes recreation. Anyone.
Yeah. You know?
Yeah. But
however,
potentially.
As a cultural standard, I think it would be good to have a cultural standard of safe, responsible use. We didn't have that culture for mushrooms. It got wiped away. It got lack of better terms, it got whitewashed into big media culture between these two ideas. There's a couple other ones that I'll be talking about in a new article coming out in the first edition of Psychedelic American. But these two paradigms about it kind of disconnect us from the potential benefit, and also further exacerbate the potential damages, because we're using them irresponsibly, and then we have the bad trip. We get like the bad trip messes us up a little bit because we're not prepared. We get those dark feelings in a very sensitive place. We get minor or major amounts of post-traumatic stress disorder around the emotional honesty that's occasioned. We put up the hides, we create the compensation, we never go back there. And that can be dangerous to young ones. I've gotten calls from friends who are parents being like, whoa, my 15-year-old ate mushrooms at this party and they had a really terrible time, and we think that there might be something wrong. They think that there's something wrong in their head now. What's happening? And I've had to like sit and talk and be like, okay, so what's actually happening, and assess like, where are you at?
Wow.
Do you need to go see somebody? It doesn't seem like that's the case, right? Because they didn't have access to like, here's how you can use them responsibly.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to mitigate that harm by offering something that's accessible, that says, hey, here's a call to attention on being responsible with these things, because they're a medicine. And that's what I was doing with Decomposing the Shadow.
Well, I absolutely love that perception and that direction that you've taken with it, because just from hearing, you shared with me before we were recording too, that you have had people ask you to kind of just come talk to them about life in general, and it may not even have to do with psychedelics, but it seems to me that you're someone who has gone through some pretty hard times, and you chose your avenue of how you wanted to explore healing yourself, and you got a ton of life experience out of it as well. And I think that giving psychedelics a new medium, a new level of communication for anyone interested at all in these things, because I think the reality is people are going to do them, and they're going to continue to do them, and they always kind of have done them. And not just psychedelics, but we're talking, alcohol and tobacco and weed and all that kind of stuff has been around for the ages, and will continue to. And that's almost inevitable. So to continue to have our society put a war on drugs, and to really hold off information, and almost in a way attack science, and like sweep factual evidence under the carpet in the name of the law, and putting people in prison, I think that's ugly in itself. But by giving a new medium and a new level of communication to people, they can learn that it's not as scary as that.
Right.
And that if they choose to go and do it, they need to understand that, yes, you can get in trouble with the law for these things.
Or on a personal level, you can go some really dark places
as well.
And with Decomposing the Shadow, it's called Decomposing the Shadow. It's about beautiful. So how do these dark feelings actually help us more than the light ones in these sessions?
Yeah.
And it's about more than just the mushrooms, obviously, too. You've read it, and that's why people tend to contact me, is because what the mushroom offers is the catalyzing of natural processes more effectively to the result of healing as a term, but in exploring what the mushrooms are doing to the person, not neurologically but personally, experientially, you start to see a lot of natural things that are just being turned up. And then you start to learn, like, from these extremes of muted emotions to like overflowing, like, turn it to the gain to 11 type of emotions, where the subtleties are, and how these subtleties are unfolding towards, health or illth, right? And so the book premises on mushrooms, but it offers so much more than that. And that's what I want to do too, because people are interested in psychedelics. It's kind of a hot topic right now.
It totally is. It's very popular.
Same thing with my second book. It comes out, it's like Soundscapes and Psychedelics, talking about, a rational explanation for consciousness expansion with psychedelics and music festival environments. And yet when you read it, it's a deep philosophy book about the nature of reality, and talks about, like a rational description of the interplay between mind and body, and how that communicates into health and nutrition, and brain health and cognition and self-perception.
Beautiful, man.
and belief systems and cultural fads and all these things too.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of piggybacking on the psychedelic thing, which is great because I find it really interesting, but it offers more, right? It's more than psychedelics. And that's why I do conscious relationships this year as the workshop that I offer, the lecture I offer, because it's not just about the psychedelics. It's like, okay, so yeah, so we had the awakening, now what?
Right.
So how does this apply now in our
Love it.
lives? Because we can't just take psychedelics all the time.
Yeah.
Right, so like, how can I apply what I learned in those sessions, in that growth process, in those periods of time where it was time to do it? Now, when it's time to apply it, you know, what ways does it apply?
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's great, man. I think that you take what is popular for people to hear with the topic of psychedelics, right? That's popular in itself, and it can be attractive to people. It can be controversial in a lot of audiences, but the way you present it gives it kind of, I think you help people get over the kind of hype about it from the beginning, and you just start getting into what's real. And what's real is you and this life you're living and the experience that you kind of have and can go into by choice with these psychedelics. And in my personal experience, I always like kind of thinking of like the devil's advocate type of side of things. It's like,
Sure.
oh, well, how come you can't go and get all of that from a therapist? How come you know, why would you have to take the mushrooms to have these realizations about your life? And it's just like, well, are the mushrooms the reason? Maybe, maybe not. But what they have done is they get you into a completely different head state, a different mental state, a different emotional state.
A different neurological
altogether.
functioning
And
state. Yeah.
as of recently, I've read an article where they're pretty much saying that when you're on psilocybin mushrooms, your brain shows up very similar to how you are in a dream. And they're looking, it sounds like they've done, there's been a lot of research done on that, and that the more they do, the more they're saying, yeah, this is pretty much like you're in a waking dream. And I've talked a little bit about dreams on this podcast too, but essentially I think it really starts opening up a whole lot of neural pathways at the same time, but I could be wrong. And from my own experience, it just feels like there's a ton of stuff going on, and it's all coming from my own subconscious. My own thoughts are releasing. I'm having random ideas. Emotions are bubbling up out of nowhere. And eventually, if I focus on one thing, or if one thing turns up really loud, like you said, like if one thing decides to just crank up in me, I have no other choice but to focus on that.
Yeah, because if you try to resist it,
yeah, if you
ain't
try
gonna
to
work.
resist it, you have a crazy bad trip, and then all of a sudden fear starts to fuel this manifestation of your emotion and your ideas and your thoughts, and you start to just freak out or whatever it is. But really, it's like, yeah, okay, the mushroom brought me to that place where my underlying pre-existing natural human emotion and fears and thoughts and ideas we're living kind of were able to come out. Whereas normally a lot of those things you never like most of us don't realize are things that we may have had suppressed or forgotten about our whole lives that are affecting us today, which is kind of why I asked you, you know, since taking this journey, what things do you still notice? Like, what are you still working on from healing? Because I don't think healing ever stops. I think we're constantly in and out of, and this is actually, you explained this to me before, this kind of concept of chaos and comprehension, and how our lives
Chaos and coherence. Yeah.
Chaos and coherence,
Yeah.
right? How sometimes we have to go through the chaos to really understand something. And even if you're in a really good place and you aren't struggling, or if you're not feeling like you need healing, you can take a psychedelic and it'll say, wait a second, this is gonna like rock your world, man. You forgot about this important thing in your life, and let's deal with it. You know, it's like the whole dialogue, I find, becomes so entertaining and beautiful. I mean, I've had moments where I'm totally against where I got myself, where it's like, yeah, I decided to take some psychedelics, and then there's a moment or two where it's like, man, that was a bad idea because I don't feel good, and I'm scared, and I'm judging myself, and I have all these fears about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And that's that moment. Those are those moments where I feel like I've had the biggest kind of like epiphanies, or kind of like, wow, realizing those are all the fears I have about myself ongoingly, and then coming out of it and learning how to just like work through them and let them flow, and afterwards almost celebrating the fact that I got to a place that I could be so true and so vulnerable with myself.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
or with another too, if you happen to explore psychedelics with a partner or a friend.
Yeah, small group settings too. Like,
yeah.
I think that's another important topic, and I would ask you too. It's like, do you recommend, or do you highly put importance on set and setting? I think that's a common thing that people talk about with taking psychedelics responsibly.
I very strongly, I very strongly believe, due to it being repeatedly like affirmed for me, that the setting, and dose, which are like the classic three that were learned from all the psychedelic psychotherapy research in the late 50s, early 60s, before it was criminalized in 71. I think that those are the big three, like, really important elements for generating the experience. That's
Right.
why if you read Decomposing the Shadow, right, it's cultivating a set and then discusses setting and dose later.
Right.
And then the fourth one, which we're really coming to over the last little while, it's becoming more common, is integration. And that's how you take what you got from there and apply
Right.
it into your life.
Mm-hmm.
Group settings can be good for that kind of stuff. If you reflect with your groups later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. How would you describe set versus setting? And I think even myself, I understand what it means, but I wouldn't know how to describe what is set and what is setting.
Well, setting is like your physical environment, and
Right.
set is your mindset going into it.
Okay.
So
like what your intention is, where you're doing it, who with, how much you're taking, and also the aftermath of, wow, that was a crazy experience, or I just went through this experience. What am I looking forward to moving back into a sober state?
Yeah, the default world. How do I apply these things? And that's not easy. That's the most challenging part.
Yeah.
It's not hard to find a couple of friends, decide you're going to take something, find a space, and put it in your body. That's not difficult.
No.
In fact, it's so easy that it's like it can be
Widely
It's so easy that we need to talk about why we should be a little bit more responsible with it, right? It's the integration part that's very difficult.
For sure.
And I talk about that. I talk about integration more so in soundscapes and psychedelics than in Decomposing the Shadow. I do touch on it in Decomposing the Shadow, but in soundscapes, I had come even deeper into an understanding of integration that I feel is communicated, is recapitulated from Decomposing the Shadow and then expanded upon since like later learning.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wow, man. Just amazing stuff. I mean, talking about integration, I think we've already been really actually giving a lot of good information, and you've been giving a lot of good information on how psychedelics and the psychedelic experience plays into your life.
Mm-hmm.
What would be a few main things that you would recommend to people to consider doing before they, or I guess after a psychedelic experience? What are some things that people can do to start really finding ways to integrate? Because I think, as you said, it can be very hard to do. I know it can be very hard to do because sometimes after a trip or something, it feels like it was a dream and everything that happened was very fleeting. And sometimes certain things just don't feel like they meant anything. You know what I mean? It's like the trip's done, and you kind of just keep moving forward. But what are the key things that can make integrating powerful for people?
Well, in Decomposing the Shadow, I offer the come down, revisit, and contemplate model.
Okay.
Which is like, well, first off, come down from the drug, revisit what you got there, like what did you bring back with you, and then contemplate it. It's pretty simple. For me, I would take notes, but I wouldn't sit there taking notes the whole time. It's not necessarily about trying to fish out every little bit that you see. There's just so much that you just wouldn't really be there. It's about cultivating a space for the processes. And like, actually, Terrence McKenna, great comment that he makes is like looking for the, like, going out like an explorer, like a fisherman, into the psychedelic sea, and you're looking for the medium-sized fish. It's not so small that it jumps through the net, like you're getting every little one. Most of them jump through the net and you got almost nothing. And it's not so big that most people can't digest it in a single sitting, right? So you get the medium-sized ideas, and I would just like jot them down, like an idea, usually a little bit later in the journey, like just make a reference of it. And so come down from there, sleep, It's have a good sleep, drink good water, eat clean food. That's like number one for integrating any powerful experience if you want it to settle. Right. So on the very accessible level, have a good sleep, take a few notes, or draw a picture, whatever sparks an awareness to revisit what you had there in a way to help potentiate it a little bit more into long-term memory, and contemplate it in essentially like let it become a part of your life. In soundscapes and psychedelics, I say don't tell the story right away. If I have a big psychedelic journey and I'm not exactly sure what it means, I don't think it would be a good idea for me to just tell you what I saw, right? Because what I saw was my conscious mind attempting to the best of its ability to render some sort of set of metaphorical language and symbols to communicate the emotional processes going on and the implications there. The real lessons come later, and they come later assuming that you don't solidify the lessons first into the incomplete metaphorical picture that was emerged.
So try not to put a limitation or a definition of what it was until you
see if it fits.
fully
see if it fits.
Feel like you have a good grip on it. No, I can definitely resonate with that. I like the fact that you gave mention of having good water and having good sleep. I was at a David Wolf talk once, actually at an electronic music festival.
Was it Shambhala last year or the year before?
It was a music festival that I don't necessarily care to promote at this time.
Fair enough, yeah.
Because I'm over it. But
you can edit that out if you want.
I'm fully with many music festivals, but this one I don't care to mention. But
fair enough, yeah.
Anyways, I loved his conversation because it was mostly about, like, he was getting real with the crowd, just saying, "Look, I know why all you hippies are here," type of thing. And I'm probably here doing the same thing. He was being joking, and he really just gave a lot of good information on how to take drugs or take alcohol or whatever with a bunch of healthy things that are going to help mediate what the ill effects can be. So I know you're pretty up with your health and wellness, and especially with nutrition. I mean, you and I helped you co-host an event once.
Re-envisioning wellness.
Re-envisioning wellness.
That was great, Tim, yeah.
So that was a lot of fun, and I know you have a lot of insight with nutrition and superfoods. Specifically with psychedelic experiences, do you have any recommendations on food and proper hydration, or kind of anything more physical like that?
Well, those things are all really specific. You can imagine that, just look at the chemistry of what you're taking. Essentially, so if you're taking a tryptamine-based psychedelic, anything with MAOIs, which is monoamine oxidase inhibitors, are going to potentiate the effects because it slows down how fast your digestive system will break down the component, like the alkaloids, the tryptamine-based alkaloids in the psychedelic, so that more of that can be uptaken into the bloodstream. With psilocybin mushrooms, for example, more of the psilocybin can be dephosphorylated into psilocin and brought up into the bloodstream before it's broken down by monoamine oxidase, right? So you take an MAOI that speeds it up, things like Heishu, cacao, passion flower, that kind of stuff, which is the opposite for if you're going to take a large dose of, say, MDMA, because you don't want to have a lot of MAOIs going on when you're taking something that is a serotonin agonist and just potentiating a shitload of serotonin going through your system, because one of the dangers of MDMA is to produce serotonin syndrome, which your brain just crashes down because it basically is being poisoned by its own neurochemicals. Right? So you want to be careful with that kind of stuff. But then again, just like alcohol, a little bit of alcohol, a moderate amount of alcohol, can be good to exercise the liver. So on MDMA, a moderate amount of chocolate maybe might be good to help. A glass of wine at night and get your antioxidants in and blah blah blah. Right. If that research continues to hold, then yeah. So those kind of technical suggestions. I mean, mostly I like playing with the idea, first off, grounded in science and
Yeah.
What are the phytonutrients in there? Because that's important. How are these going to chemically interact? Because you're dealing with brain chemistry and body chemistry, and you're looking to potentiate experience. Then looking at what are these herbs like on a... If I were to look at the components of these herbs, taking my experience from using them, taking what they look like physically as plants, how they're used culturally, and what I've been told about what they can do for me, what personality characteristics do I intuitively project onto that plant? That's the spirit of the plant in my mind. So what spirit do you want to invite in? What potential characteristics do you want to invite into your experience?
Cool. No, I get that.
Right?
And I think you can relate that to alcohol, where I think many people that drink have an understanding of what alcohols they like. Sometimes they know a friend, or maybe they know that if they drink Jägermeister, they're going to be an asshole that night, or whatever it is, right? So in fun, you're kind of giving that kind of point that you can somewhat affect your own trip for the better when it comes to the health and the risk factor of taking it, to the general personality that you hold to the herbs or whatever, anything you take. For me, it's like if I was to take some really awesome raw chocolate, it automatically on its own gives me a nice uplifting boost. So it helps me feel really good going into an experience, right? So you're just kind of recommending, make sure you understand risk, you know how to improve the experience, and also help get out of it what you kind of want.
Yeah.
And how about recovery? Is there things that are good? Like, I would say, is there a blanket kind of effect on your adrenals? I know you said with MDMA, so if you were lacking in serotonin because of a huge serotonin dump, would you recommend like 5-HTP or tryptophan?
That's a great question. I don't know anymore. I used to think yes, but then I was thinking about it. I was reading about cocaine as a dopamine reuptake inhibitor, also a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and that when you take cocaine, what you're doing is you're blocking the reuptake of dopamine, so it sits around a little bit more. But because it's sitting around a little bit more, the brain wants to have a natural balance that can be changed in changing its architecture slowly over time as the balance is maintained. But if there's a sharp change, then there'll be a sharp compensation. And so a sharp change of excess of dopamine in the system will cause for the downregulation of the receptors, which is to say that those cells go away. They no longer pick up dopamine because they need to make sure that it's clear. So afterwards you have like a decline in your capacity to feel a sense of pleasure or satisfaction from the dopamine.
Wow.
I wonder, I don't know what the science is, and if somebody listening to the podcast could link it to me, please do.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'm sure you'll link my website in the show notes. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a contact form there. But is it that we're depleting our serotonin levels and we don't have it available? Or are we causing such an excessive blast of serotonin that there's a downregulation effect? If there's being a downregulation effect, no amount of 5-HTP is going to make it mean a fucking thing. Right? Because it's not that you don't have enough serotonin. And that could be a part of it, but it would be that your brain is not uptaking the serotonin that's there, in which case 5-HTP doesn't mean anything.
Right.
So I don't know about that specifically. Yeah. It's just a cool question I've been asking myself recently that I'd like to get to the bottom of, but there isn't heaps of research there. I know there's a lot of talk of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, really important right now because of what it's doing for...
Very common, very popular.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've got treatment-resistant post-traumatic stress disorder, and like, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure the percentage is like 80% of like successful remission from PTSD.
Yeah, and my knowledge is that with that therapy, it's mostly being experimented with veterans, veterans, police officers, and I can't remember a third denotation of person, but essentially, they're working with people that have some serious PTSD and depression. I've also heard of MDMA being used for couples counseling in a way.
That was back in the day before it kind of got like a big faux pas on it.
Well, even now, Rick Doblin with MAPS had made mention that
they're moving towards that.
They've done a little bit of that as well.
Oh, that's cool.
and grief and stuff like that. But I think that's a good point too, is that for anyone that may discount the use of psychedelics as for healing, I think there's some pretty obvious things to say about some psychedelics for sure that have been used as medicines. We've talked about James's experience with being healed, and we've talked about also some of these other uses that have been experimented with, but the results are absolutely clear that with things like MDMA and psilocybin, cannabis. Is cannabis the right word anymore? I've heard some people tell me
personally,
it's the
in
wrong
my
word.
opinion, if what would they say is the right word though?
Well, marijuana I heard is a slang term.
Yeah, marijuana was the term that the government used a media campaign to manipulate the public into hating an evil drug that they all knew as cannabis.
Yeah.
I consider marijuana to be, I mean, if I'm going to get a little, like, kind of airy-fairy with it, I consider that to be her slave name. And cannabis is, like, you know, that's like the Latin, like the first part of the Latin binomial name.
Okay.
You know, like cannabis. And then for personally, I would say ganja as a spiritual reference out of like the sadhus smoking ganja and contemplating.
Right.
Whatever.
Ganja is more of something that I call it too. But back to that point is that these things, whatever we call them, are showing absolute merit in current science today, not to mention thousands of years of recorded history with many of these plant medicines. Yeah. So I think, you know, that it's really good to see that not just people like you and I are having these conversations, and that there are larger organizations putting in work and effort to bring these medicines to a more useful front. Mm-hmm. And I would say there's definitely a similarity where I see that not just with these, but I would say also with anything else when it comes to helping people just have more energy during the day, whether it's nutritionally or through exercise or whatever. A little bit can go a long way, and it doesn't. You don't have to start doing something once you're already broken, right? Not once you already have PSD. You don't have to. That's not the best time to take it.
Preventative
right?
Medicine.
Yeah. So that moderation, that part of a lifestyle. We were even talking earlier about the kind of whole 80-20 concept of, you know what, if you commit to wanting to take care of yourself at 80% of the time, and you know you're making conscious efforts to invest in your health, and 20% of the time you're celebrating life.
Yeah,
that's
usually
usually a good balance.
If you love cheesecake, if you love cheesecake,
I love
right?
cheesecake.
Your willpower is, it can only go so far in a day, right? It can only go so far in a week. And if you're eating extremely health conscious and you're not eating cheesecake because you're health conscious, and then on Saturday you go out with a friend and they want to grab cheesecake for your dessert, life is too fucking short to say no to that cheesecake in that moment, you know? So yeah, that's like I said, like 80% of the time, dial it in. 20% of the time, life's too fucking short.
Yeah.
Eat cake. Have your cake and eat it too, you know?
No, yeah, I'm definitely on board with that, man. So, all in all, James, it sounds like you've had a very exciting and eye-opening last couple of years in becoming an author. Do you have any suggestions or advice to anyone that might be an aspiring author or simply an aspiring entrepreneur?
Yes. Let's readdress that question. I want to finish this integration process.
Okay.
Because you wanted to know more about integrating. I think, personally, that the best integration practice for having taken psychedelics and applying them into your life is a meditation practice. Okay. Just putting that out there is a meditation practice. And maybe next time you have me on and I get a bit more research, we could talk about myelinating the new neural connections being cultivated through the rapid expansion of neural connections when on psychedelics. That's a whole other topic that I'm really stoked on that I write about in Soundscapes.
Cool.
But tips for authors. Just give it your best. Do your best. And your best looks different every day. But if you want to see something come into this world, and it's something like writing a book, that shit is not easy. And you're going to face a lot of adversity, and you're going to face a lot of people that in their own sense of fearing failure will tell you that you can't do it. And if you give it your all, you may still not pull it off, but at least you have dedicated yourself to something. And in my case, I gave it my all, and I invested my whole life. I quit my job to do this, and it has been fueling me since then. And so I would just say, just give it your best, take it seriously. It's not like you've got your job and then in your off time you've got your hobby that is your art. It's like you've got your wage position, and then when you're not at your wage position, you've got your career. And when you're sitting down at your computer to do correspondence or to write or whatever you're doing, that's work time. You're at work now, and treat it in that same serious manner.
Absolutely.
Right?
Cool.
Or unless you want to be playful with it, and the playfulness gets you going, be playful. But for me, it was like, I'm at work now. I structured every day to cultivate hours to write every single day, right? Because that was my work time, and I gave that my all as if my career depended on it, right?
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that career is not often enough addressed topic in our generation, and I would say people in their 20s and even into the 30s. I think career has gotten a bad rap. But
well, we're being told you need to pick a career from these box models
Yeah.
and then go to university and then come out of university and dedicate the rest of your life to it. But
Yeah.
in reality, it doesn't work that
Yeah.
way. And I think the average amount of time, 5 or 6 years ago, I heard that the average amount of time for a college graduate to get into a career of their training was 6 years.
Yeah. No, I totally would believe that, just from the amount of people I know personally that are not doing what they went to school for. But nonetheless, I think that there's so much to be learned from the idea of a career being that this is something that you want to someday make a living off of, that you focus on the day-to-day. And if that means a lot to you, from what I'm hearing from you, James, is that you need to treat it as such, and that don't feel defeated because you can't make that money now. And I think that I've seen
or receive that acknowledgement, because money is a form of acknowledgement.
Absolutely.
Right.
So it's like, don't be discouraged that you still have to go to a 9-to-5 job or full-time work to get by. And your passion can still can still come to fruition if you so choose. And I think it all comes down to lifestyle and everything like that. And I love that you did bring up a meditation practice as part of integration with psychedelics too, because and I know you too have been interested in sensory deprivation and flotation therapy.
Yeah, totally.
And it's just, I've been on and off with it ever since we were both given access to a tank.
You were floating today, weren't you? Did you go?
I had an appointment, and because it was a beautifully hot day, I decided not to go and just enjoyed the outdoors. I can kind of go anytime now, but I have gone twice now in the last 3 weeks, and it's just been really good to be in the tank regularly again. I would say that in itself is a psychedelic experience. I would say that when you go into the tank, there's some and I'm not going to go deep on this, I'm just going to draw some similarities to what we talked about with even psilocybin, is that, like taking a psychedelic, you put yourself into a state that you're not going to be able to necessarily control. But you have chosen
and that is
to
really
go there.
uncomfortable in a lot of ways.
Yeah, but you have chosen to go there, and there are a set kind of parameter of things that are going to start happening to you that you can't make sense of or are uncomfortable. But similar to going into a tank. And I think for anyone that is a little bit on the edge about any psychedelics, yes, integrating yourself into a good meditation practice is very useful, and I've done a lot of meditation myself. But the flotation tank helps that process, I think, perpetuate, because it puts you into a place without any sensory input.
For over an hour
Up to 90 minutes if you want.
Yeah.
And many people, this stuff is decades of research old, and now it's really starting to become more of a pop culture thing. Whereas in the early days, it really was, like we're talking about psychedelics now, was used for people with real problems, with real disorders and things like that. And now it's starting to be viewed as, no, this is actually useful for the common man, for a lifestyle thing. And similar to taking a drug, you go into a place where you are forced to kind of like your parasympathetic nervous system will then become less active, so that you're not anymore taking in information subconsciously from noises and lights and sounds and textures and feelings and temperature and all of those things. All of those inputs are not there anymore, so your stress levels of input are pretty much gone, and you're left with just your own internal stressors and your own internal stimulation of your mind and your emotion. So in the tank, if anyone's done it or anyone wants to do it, I would recommend you do it a few times with a lot of mindfulness, and understand it's going to be a really awkward experience for the first few times. Maybe similar to taking a psychedelic for the first few times.
Yeah, for floats, I think I typically would invite people to try 3 floats within a month. That's
exactly what I recommend too, actually.
Yeah.
No, it's definitely a different place to go, and because it does things to your actual nervous system that you can't necessarily control because you've just turned things off. You're not getting that input. It will take you on your own little journey. You are going to be left in there with your own mind and your own emotion, and I think it's so similar to taking a psychedelic.
Yeah,
as you mentioned. Yeah,
I'd like to mention that. So ketamine, when you take ketamine, a dissociative anesthetic with psychedelic effects that is very commonly misused, it binds to a certain point within the NMDA receptors in the glutamate neurotransmitter system, and in doing so blocks the sending of excitatory signals from the brain to the body. Magnesium binds to the same receptor site, and magnesium is the primary solvent in Epsom salts, which you're absorbing through your skin into your bloodstream in the float tank.
No kidding.
Just putting that out there for you.
Well, that's really interesting.
And John C. Lilly, the guy who invented the float tank, before it became public, and he went some like kind of dark ways with it, like had to go through some like rehab stuff, or I could be misquoting how true that is with the rehab stuff, but look into it. But yeah, he had figured he had found a drug that took him right into the deepest part of the float tank right away, and it was ketamine. But he was injecting it. I don't recommend anyone take ketamine, but and it's very different being in a float tank. It's much more you're like navigated easier. You can get out and move anytime you want. You can end it anytime you choose if you wanted to. Yeah. But yeah, there is like inclination as to why it might help to further potentiate the actual visionary type of experiences and that relaxation, because you do stop to send, the move now, gotta get up, gotta blah, blah, right?
Yeah. One thing I've thought about ingesting before I went in there is a supplement called Relora.
Yeah.
It's magnolia extract and a type of philodendron extract.
Okay.
And essentially it's a proponent to calming the central nervous system, to calm down your nerves, your anxiety, anything that you might be having. And I've taken it quite a bit before sleep. Not to say that I don't have a hard time getting to sleep, but I like deep sleeps. I love vivid dreams. I love lucid dreaming. So if I can help myself just have uninterrupted sleep, that's great for me.
Yeah.
And this stuff, taking even during the day, just like chills you out.
I'd like to try some if you have some.
Yeah.
Because before I go to bed.
Yeah.
See how
totally.
It works.
Yeah. I would mention too that James is currently touring right now, as I said earlier, and I happen to have a spot for him to spend the night. So
that's why we're hanging out here in your studio.
Yeah, we can keep it to an hour, but we can just keep bullshitting and recording good content all night. I don't care. So
yeah,
man. I think that in the end, I love the take the approach that you're going with all of this stuff, and I think that. And in conclusion, I love how level-headed you are about exploring such a widely controversial topic. I think,
and making waves too, because I made it very clear that what I wanted to do was I wanted to be the guy that was comfortable to go out there and be like, yep, everyone look at me, I'm talking about it, and ask me all your questions. Ask me your most intelligent, grounded questions and your most ignorant questions. Heckle me. Please don't heckle me. But like, ask me these questions. Ask me the ignorant ones, because I want to answer them grounded and with respect, and I want to be that person to do that, because somebody needs to be that person. And I felt like I was into doing that. Like, I like your podcast name, Level Headed Rebel, because it's like rebelling against it, but like, if, pardon my use of like out of context, but if I were to choose to rebel in a way that cultivates discourse on controversial topics, I need to do it in a way that doesn't invite me into ridicule,
right,
or to be denounced for my message. And so I have to be fully together in who I am and what I'm representing. I have to be that level head.
And I think that the concept of level-headed rebel, it continues to evolve every time I do a podcast, because simply the name to me means that I want to talk to people who I think are out there promoting something that they absolutely believe in, that in some way goes against some sort of cultural norm that is not necessarily serving people the best way anymore. And that can be through health, that can be through the way people run their businesses, through the way people do their own art. I mean, just look at the list of people that I've had on the podcast. This is episode 22 now. I mean, I think that that's where this is going, is looking at people who are confident in what they're saying. They are in check enough and humble enough to know when what they are pushing or promoting or whatever it is, the changes that they want to make, that they're confident those changes that they're promoting are good for people, and that they are willing to push the envelope on what people want to talk about with a lot of factual information behind it. Because as you mentioned, you kind of alluded to being in a phase where you were just looking up a lot of different kind of conspiracy-based things and all of that. I've mentioned this on podcasts before, where I'm all for people trying to find where the government's doing things wrong, or maybe how governments are turning a blind eye to certain things. But
we need to hold those guys accountable, those people accountable, because they're supposed to be our leaders. And where are they leading us? We need to know why, where, and in what ways.
But where I get lost a lot of the times is when I feel someone's waving a flag just out of hate or just out of anger, and just kind of like being pro-anti, where they're for everything that's against something, right? Where it's like they're constantly, looking at all these bad things and trying to point fingers, but really it's like, where's the cause? What are you trying to improve? And if you can't, it's great to shine a light on some topics, but you know what? Make it worth it, I guess, is what I want to have come through this podcast. Is I want to showcase people that are out there actually saying, I want to make a change because I believe in something, and someone that I respect, someone that I don't want to come on here who I feel like might want to spread something like, I don't want to say dogma, but push beliefs that aren't confounded in.
But they have to be wearing a bandana, though, right?
I think that's the first time that we've had the doubler. Which I was thinking about before, but I was like, whatever, man. This is just the best place to be yourself. I love being raw and real. So thank you so much, James, for joining the podcast today. And if any thoughts do you have in closing? Would you like people to think and remember of this podcast?
We're in the digital era, man. That's what backtracking is for. If you really want to, like, whatever stood out for a person is what they got. What I would like to take this time to do is plug myself and what I do. So for anyone listening, check out my main website, which is jameswjesso.com. Jesso spelled Jesso, and you'll find links to all the stuff that I'm doing there. But you could also check out the websites for my books, which is Soundscapes and Psychedelics and Decomposing the Shadow. I have an audiobook. Check that out. That's all on my main website. And I have a new book that's coming out soon, so if you want to get linked into my newsletter, which you could get through jameswjesso.com, that will put you in the loop for all the stuff that's coming out. And if you live in Canada and you're headed to Motion Notion, Base Coast, or Shambhala Music Festival, I'll be teaching workshops at all of those festivals. And I'm looking to tour the UK next year. So if you're in the UK and you want to help hook that up, give me a message.
Big steps, big steps. What dates are Motion Notion and the other one after that?
I have no idea. It's the last weekend. So I returned from Ontario on the 20th. My sister's getting married this weekend, and it'll be after this podcast is posted, but I'm really excited to stand in her wedding out in Ontario. And then, so it's the weekend after the 20th is Motion Notion, so the 24th, cool. 5th, and then subsequent weekends, Motion Notion and Shambhala. Or sorry, Base Coast and Shambhala.
Excellent, man. Great, James. Where can we see some of your latest publications, perhaps?
Oh, yeah.
Where people posted articles or
yes,
like that?
So my most recent article is called Spiritual Growth and Psychedelics, and it's not necessarily what you think it is from the title. And you can find that on Cypress UK, which is a psychedelic press, but Cypress UK. And I am working on an article that'll be in the... I don't know if it's safe for me to release this yet, so hopefully it doesn't fall through for some reason, but in the first edition of Psychedelic American, which is a new magazine coming out soon. And yeah, that's about it for publications I know are coming out soon. I got some really cool news that I'm not ready to release just yet, cool. But it's moving towards really cool. If you get into my newsletter, you'll get the heads up on that. But those are the publications that I've released most recently. I might be getting published in this magazine. They accepted it, but then they haven't gotten back to my emails, so I won't cover on that either because it might fall through. But
fair enough.
Yeah,
fair enough, man. Thank you. And with how much you have on the go now, it's inevitable that we'll be sitting down again to hear about all of these things that have been going. That will happen for the rest of this year, and maybe we'll sit down and do one at the end of the summer.
Yeah, maybe, or just before I leave out to the UK.
Yeah,
next year.
Yeah, perfect. You're welcome anytime, man. Thank you so much. And for all the listeners out there, this was episode number 22 of The Level-Headed Rebel. You can find us on iTunes. You can find me on Facebook, Level-Headed Rebel with Tim Kessler. And please mention any sort of feedback, any questions you might have that I can continue to ask previous guests. Any sort of feedback to recommend what I could do better or indifferent. Tell me what you liked, tell me what you didn't like. Be honest with me. I just want to keep this going and I want to keep it free. And
subscribe to this podcast and comment on iTunes, because that's really going to help Tim get some more, to help you get some more traffic. And I think you're putting out good ideas. So if you like this, people, and you're not already into it, subscribe to the podcast.
Beautiful. Thank you, folks. Sign on off.